Sometimes, to understand a huge moment in history, you just have to look at one person's life. And today, we're going to do exactly that. Through the story of a teenager named Jane Whittle, we're going to get a real look at what it took to survive on the American frontier. But first, a quick question for you. I want you to really think about it for a second. What was your life like when you were 13? I'm guessing it involved school, friends, maybe worrying about homework, or what to post online, right? Just get a clear picture of that in your head. Okay, you got it? Now, let's compare that to Jane Whittle's life back in 1860. At 13 years old, she was already an orphan, a full-time laborer, and the main caregiver for 3 little kids. Her world, it wasn't about classrooms and friends. It was all about survival. So let's meet her. We're in the year 1860, and Jane is a 13-year-old immigrant from Australia. She's living in a pretty rough-and-tumble California mining camp called Tuttletown. And here's the thing, she's not there with her mom and dad. She's an orphan, living with her older sister's family, just trying to earn her keep. So you gotta picture the household. Her brother-in-law, William, he's a miner, so he's gone all day. That leaves her sister, Elizabeth, and Jane to handle, well, everything else. And with 3 children all under the age of 4, Jane wasn't just some helper. She was basically a second mother, and an unpaid one at that. She was absolutely essential. And sometimes history hides these little clues for us. If you look at the 1860 census, you'll see a young miner named Elijah McNew, living just a stone's throw away from Jane's family. Now, at 13, she would have had no idea, but that man, just a few lines up on a piece of paper, 5 years later, he'd be her husband. It's like a little hint of fate, buried right there in the data. To really get what her life was like, you have to understand the work. And I'm not talking about a few chores after school. We're talking about a relentless sun-up to sundown cycle of back-breaking labor. Her number one job was the kids, a 3-year-old and a pair of 1-year-old twins. I mean, can you imagine? Constant feeding, changing endless cloth diapers by hand, and just trying to keep them safe in a place that was definitely not childproof. No playpens, no disposable diapers, just constant, round-the-clock work. And let's just zoom in on one chore. Just one. Laundry. For us, it's a machine. For Jane, it was an all-day physical battle. First, you've got to haul all the water, then heat it up on a wood stove, then scrub every single piece of clothing on a washboard, then wring it all out by hand, then hang it to dry. And finally, iron everything with these super heavy cast iron wedges you heat up on that same stove. And with 3 babies, that laundry pile was never, ever empty. And you'd think that'd be a full day, right? Nope. On top of the kids and the laundry, there was everything else. Cooking every single meal from scratch, baking your own bread, keeping the wood stove going because that's your heat and your oven, tending to chickens or a garden if you were lucky, constantly sweeping out the dust that got into everything, washing all the dishes by hand, mending and sewing all of the clothes, and then, at the end of the day, emptying the chamber pots and trimming the oil lamps. The work literally never stopped. So with a workload like that, it kind of raises a pretty big question about another part of teenage life that we just take for granted: school. It's a totally fair question, right? I mean, schools did exist in California in 1860, so why wasn't a 13-year-old girl like Jane in a classroom? The answer tells you pretty much everything you need to know about what mattered most in frontier life. For a girl like Jane, getting to a schoolhouse was basically an obstacle course. First off, her family couldn't spare her. Her work at home was just too valuable. Second, schools in these mining camps were few and far between. Third, let's be honest, society at the time didn't exactly prioritize book learning for girls over learning how to run a household. And finally, even if you could overcome all that, things like books or a decent set of clothes for school might have been too expensive for a struggling miner's family. But here's the part of the story I really love, a little piece of hope. Decades later, on the 1910 census, it was recorded that Jane could, in fact, read and write. So somehow, somewhere along the way, she did it. Despite having no formal schooling, she learned. Maybe her sister taught her, or maybe she just figured it out herself. But she got it done. So that's life inside the cabin. But what about the world just outside her door? A California mining camp in 1860? Well, it wasn't just a place. It was this whole ecosystem of hope and desperation all mixed together. A world of dust and hardship and really stark contrasts. See, on the one hand, her world was almost entirely male. It was defined by the brutal work of mining, and then the rough ways the men blew off steam. Drinking, gambling, sudden fights. It was a tough landscape. But there was a whole other world that existed right alongside it. The small, tight-knit community of women. They had to rely on each other for everything, borrowing a cup of flour, helping out during childbirth. It was a support network born out of pure necessity. And Jane? She had to learn how to navigate both of those worlds every single day. So what do you do with a childhood like that? How does all of that hardship and all of that work actually shape the person you become? Because this isn't just a story about suffering, it's about how resilience is forged. When you look at her life laid out like this, it's pretty staggering. Her father dies when she's 6. She's a full-on laborer by 13. She's married by 18. And then she spends the next 47 years raising 11 of her own children. Her life never really got easy, but it was built on this foundation of incredible strength that she learned as a kid. And that's really the key takeaway, isn't it? None of what she went through was wasted. Managing the kids, stretching every resource, cooking, cleaning, holding it all together, those weren't just chores, they were an apprenticeship. They were the very skills that prepared her for a long, demanding life as a frontier wife and mother. Jane's story is just such a powerful reminder that the person we become is so often shaped by the challenges we never would have chosen for ourselves. And it kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? How do the unseen struggles of our own pasts, the big ones and the small ones, define the strengths that we count on today?